Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Discover Boating's newest research webinar, Understanding Barriers and Opportunities of Next Generation Boaters. My name is Freya Olson. I'm Director of Industry Relations here at NMMA, and I will be your host today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar will be recorded, so in the event that you get disconnected or have a colleague who's missed out today, we will be publishing the recording in the next several days. We'll also have time for questions at the end of the webinar, so please use the chat feature to submit those as they occur to you throughout the presentation, and we'll address those time permitting once the webinar concludes. So for the main event, on the heels of Discover Boating's audience segmentation and behavior research, which was leveraged to create Discover Boating brand identity and the See You Out Here campaign, the team did a fresh dive into the next generation segments to understand any behavioral shifts post-pandemic. So the research shared today will look at the mindset of the next generation audience to better understand how to connect with and attract people to boating. Our speakers today are Alana Bryant, Head of Strategy at Cutwater Agency, Kevin Williams, Vice President of Marketing at NMMA, and Ellen Bradley, Chief Brand Officer and Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications at NMMA. So without further delay, Alana, Kevin, and Ellen, please take it away.
All right, Freya, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being with us today. You can hop forward here, Rebecca. What we are going to before we walk you through everything, I like to always level set and remind everybody about the mission of Discover Boating. And the National Marine Manufacturers Association, NMMA, and our partners at the Marine Retailers Association of the Americas, the MRAA, work together to engage a new generation of boaters while retaining and growing the current audience. That's our mission. That's what we set out every day to do as part of our work around Discover Boating. And what we wanted to do with this research was really do a gut check to understand where is the consumer in what we're seeing as this new normal post-pandemic. We all went through our own life adjustments and changes in both our personal lives and in our work environment. How has that impacted? How has the pandemic impacted our consumers? And you all are highly familiar with these peaks. These are Google search trends that we're sharing with you. And outdoor recreation overall, this is boating, RVing, biking, camping. We saw together a pretty big jump during that pandemic period. And we're seeing that momentum continue, but it's definitely, we're definitely settling into that new normal. Next slide. And on the boating side, we're seeing our traffic remain above pre-pandemic levels to discoverboating.com and discoverboating.ca. And we're seeing Google search trends also remain healthy and growing against pre-pandemic levels. And when we look at what's happening in boat sales, a lot of you are, I'm sure, very familiar. We've definitely seen a slowdown there. And so the question that we ask ourselves is, how are we going to make sure that we're doubling down on how we're engaging our customers? Are we doing it in the right way? Are we engaging our consumers so that they are really motivated to be part of our lifestyle? And what does that mean when it comes to our marketing tactics and the deliverables that we put out as Discover Boating into the market, and what we're seeking across the industry for you all to do to help make sure that we're continuing that momentum? Next slide. And how we do this through Discover Boating is really a multi-pronged omni-channel strategy. A lot of you have heard this before, but these 4 buckets entail all of our awareness campaigns. That's what you see us heavy in the market throughout the summer and in the spring and the early fall. We have our robust digital community, with the center of that being discoverboating.com and discoverboating.ca. We have our boat shows and that experiential component, with the new strategy kicking off in 2022 with Discover Boating being in front of the NMMA-owned boat shows. And then we have the ownership experience that's really driven in a large part by our partners at MRAA through their dealer certification program and a lot of the consumer education offerings that they deliver to their dealer members. And I am going to now give you a sneak peek into what we've been up to, so you get a little bit of a feel for how some of these pieces have been coming to life. There's a video here. Bear with us.
an amazing resource to help you get on the water, whether you plan to rent, charter, or chart a course owning your own boat.
There's something very zen about being on the water, just being in the open space and one with nature.
And that was my dream, was just to do what I loved and be on the water. There's nothing else like it in the world. You could say boats are the spaceship of the ocean.
With Ebony Magazine, Ebony created a series over the summer, coolest black families that enjoy the boating lifestyle.
It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your skin color is, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter where you've been. If you love something and you want to pursue it and you go after it, you can make it happen.
There's just something magical about being in that water. Whether you're in the ocean, on the lake, or in a river, there's just something healing about the water waves.
I recently partnered with Discover Boating and spent an amazing day on the water. Whether you want to rent, charter, or own the boat of your dreams, they are there to help.
All right. Thank you for hitting that, Rebecca. And Alana, I am going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. So as Ellen mentioned, we really wanted to take an opportunity to look at this post-pandemic landscape, to define what this new normal is, and to gain insights on this next generation's buyers of today and then tomorrow, and really understand how they're different from previous generations of boat buyers. So we go on to the next slide, please. Right, so we undertook some pretty rigorous quantitative research. We did a national study. It was done in the fall of 2022. And we looked at a large number of existing and potential boaters. And we really were looking, in terms of exploration, at understanding their socio-demographics, what made them tick, how they lived their lives, what their lifestyles were, and their attitudes and interests in boating. So next slide, please. Great. So before I do that, I just wanted to take a minute to step back and reintroduce our three target segments. Some of you may be seeing this for the first time. Hopefully, this is not new for all of you, but we have three audiences we'll be looking at today. Our core segment, which are closest to our existing audience of boat owners, and then we have growth and emerging. So I'll start with the core segment, just a refresher on who they are. They are most likely to be older. I'm going to say predominantly boomer, but a bit of Generation X. They're more likely to be retired. They're least physically active, but that's not surprising if there are a lot of retirees within this audience. They're more likely to be blue collar. They're the most likely to be very heavy hunting and fishing enthusiasts. And they enjoy, as you'll see in the personality and motivations, they're really all about relaxing and enjoying a slower pace of life. They tend to be more rural. They're the most rural of the three segments and the least ethnically diverse. In terms of their personalities and how they view the world, they're very family oriented. They're very relaxed, laid back, cheerful, outdoorsy. And you can see this reflected in their top boating motivations. The first of which is to be with family. The second is to be outdoors. The third motivation is party-like experiences. And I want to qualify that by an anecdote with some of the qualitative research we did with this audience that, when they say party, it's really relaxing with friends. This doesn't mean that this is fraternity style partying. In most cases, we hear them talk about having a beer with their friends on the pontoon and then going and taking that to the campfire. But the point is, it's an enjoyable experience with their crowd of friends. And then lastly, they like to get off the grid and be remote. They really like to kind of disappear and go further away from spaces and feel like they're in a really remote experience. And we also wanted to give you a flavor of lifestyle brands. And this again is quantitatively based on typical types of choices of brands they buy or shop with. And so we'd most likely see them at Dick's. Or Bass, for example, a Walmart, Cracker Barrel. These are the kinds of places that this traditional core audience would go to. And we wanted to give a quick flavor of their experience and connection to boat ownership. So on the next slide, we can see here that they have a very high boat ownership penetration. That's roughly 1 in 4 of people in this segment own a boat, and over half of them would like to own a boat. And in terms of their boating experiences within the past year, we can see from the type of boats that they've been on that they're the most likely to have been on a fishing boat within the last year. So that is our core segment. Again, more reflective of the current base of existing boat owners. The second segment that we have is what we've called the growth segment. This is the lowest hanging fruit opportunity to complete NMMA and Discover Boating's mission to grow the category. What's the next out audience that we're looking at? And this is our growth target. So they are more likely to be younger. They're going to be Gen X, Millennial, a little bit of Gen Z. They're more likely to have a higher income. They consider themselves very active and sporty. They're involved in a lot of activities. If you look at their behaviors, I call them the kind of ing people. They're skiing, hiking, canoeing, anything that gets you out doing an ing, they're out doing that. They like to be outdoors. They're very tech savvy. So we see a very high penetration of social media. If they're out doing their ing, they're sharing it with their friends so they can show them in their Instagram pictures of whatever they're out doing. They're more likely to have children at home. They're more likely to be urban, and they're more ethnically diverse. In terms of how they describe themselves and their personality, they see themselves as adventurous, passionate, thrill-seeking, sporty, and athletic. And then you see that in their top boating motivations. Their number one priority is to socialize outdoors, but then their next most popular reason and motivation for being on a boat and boating is to be active, because they're out doing stuff. And even when they're on the boat, they're active, they're wakeboarding, they have a lot of engagement around personal watercraft. They're probably jet skiing as well. They see themselves as adventurous and explorers, and the boat is one of the ways that they can be adventurous and explore. And then lastly, they like to be immersed in nature. So they're very much about engaging with the nature around them and enjoying the experience of being out in nature. And the kinds of brands that we see them most likely or more likely to purchase are things like Patagonia. Not surprising, that's probably one of the official brands of the ing people and hiking. Trader Joe's, maybe more whole, natural kinds of foods, more down-to-earth foods, and Instagram. And then if we go on to the next slide, in terms of their relationship with boating, they are also have a high penetration of current boat owners, not quite as high as our core segment, but they have a very large population of members of this target audience who would like to own a boat. So that's 65%, which is quite high. And when we look at their boating experience in the past year, they are very likely and more likely than the others to have been on a personal watercraft, which is not surprising because that's a pretty active thing. And you have to be pretty active and energetic and risk-taking to do that. But you can see that reflect in that kind of behavior. And we'll see that in some of the other data as we follow up. And then if we go to the last segment, so this is what we call the emerging segment. As you can see from the data we're going to show you in a moment, they're not as engaged in the everyday boating world, but there is an opportunity to bring them into this world because the desire to be part of it is there. They're just not part of that now. So a little bit on the profile of this audience. They are also younger. They're more likely to be millennial, Gen X, Gen Z. They have the most education. They're the most likely to have a higher degree or a master's degree. They have the highest worth. They are, in fact, very much luxury consumers, and we see that in the data. They're very well traveled. They're the most likely to be traveling overseas and be international travelers. They're the most likely to be living in urban centers and most likely to be ethnically diverse. And we're going to go through them in a moment in more detail, but they're quite similar to the growth folks, but perhaps not as outdoorsy active. They see themselves as risk takers, ambitious, well-traveled, very tech savvy. These are people who probably spend a lot of their days in front of computers and technologies, and you'll see that in one of their boat motivations, which is to get away from that technology. So in terms of their top motivations, obviously is to socialize outdoors. They also want to go on adventures and explore. But the last two are distinct to this audience, which is they really want to disconnect from screens and technologies. So again, these are people who, I think I saw someone in the chat asking about entrepreneurs. They are most likely to be in this segment and probably stuck in an urban office for a good part of their day. And the chance to disconnect from the screens and technology and reconnect with family, friends, and nature is very high on their motivation list for boat ownership. And then the last point is in terms of what they're expecting from their boats and the experiences they have around their boats, they are most likely to want what they would consider a luxury or high-end experience on or around the water. So the quality of the boat itself, the quality of the experiences, whether that's places where they're going to moor or the clubs that they're part of, they are more attracted to a much higher end luxury experience. And that's not surprising when you look at their consumption of brands, because they tend to buy luxury brands. They tend to shop at Whole Foods. They tend to buy luxury car brands like BMWs and choose the sort of higher end restaurants like a P.F. Chang's instead of, say, an Applebee's. So that's the emerging segment, and we'll go on to size them in a moment, but you'll hopefully get a feel for them. And in terms of the emerging segment, we just mentioned this earlier, they have the least penetration of boat ownership. So unlike the other audiences and segments where roughly 1 in 4 has a boat, only 7%, a little less than 10% have a boat, but they have very high levels of desires to own a boat. And that level is at 55%. Interestingly, you know, when they're asked what boats they would like to own, not surprisingly, they would choose a yacht as one of the highest, as well as speedboats. So I'm going to take a moment now to kind of synthesize and share with you some of the insights and opportunities we found around these audiences. And one of the things we'll be looking at as we go through this is just reminding ourselves that, you know, as we look beyond the core traditional segment, we are looking at audiences that are different to and slightly further away from the traditional core where the boating audience is today. So if we look at the ethnic makeup of these three segments, at the moment, well, I should put as a context, roughly 40% of Americans today identify as non-white, non-Hispanic Americans. And this penetration of non-Hispanic white in each of these segments is smaller and smaller as we go into the next generation. So roughly 1 in 5 of our traditional boaters is from an ethnically diverse background. That goes to 1 in 4 when we go to that growth segment I just shared with you. And that goes down to 1 in 3 when it goes to the emerging segment. And then as we look further along at who's coming, you know, we are about helping people to discover boating among next generations. That goes down to 1 in 2 when it comes to Gen Z. So 1 in 2 identify as a non-white, non-Hispanic Caucasian American ethnicity. So one of the things we wanted to do then is really dive into these audiences and understand them a little bit better so that we can see how we can expand not just boat ownership, but the desire to own a boat. So we can see the size of the prize here is very, very big. Roughly 91 million Americans exist in these segments. And as we saw from our statistics on the percentage that are already interested in boating, it's already very high. And we have a really great opportunity to try and convert this very large audience of potential boat owners and expand the number of people who want to own a boat. Because what we've learned even in the data as well is it can take a very long time between wanting to own that boat and then actually making the purchase. You know, there's always a joke that says that well, it's not a joke, but statistically, the average age a Porsche owner made the decision to buy a Porsche was about aged 8. And the rest of it was just working out a way how to get that vehicle. And so when we look at our audiences, these audiences take 6 to 8 years of desiring to own a boat before they actually get into the market to get that boat. So we want to make sure that we're always filling the bucket. We're always expanding this population of potential boat owners. So I'm going to dive into the data now and go through this quickly because I know I'm hopefully going to cover it in 15 minutes and get to Q&As at the end. So what did we learn about the challenges and opportunities? If we go into the next section, please. So here are some of the key insights to share with you. Next slide, please. Great. So number one challenge that we saw, we just limited this to about 4 or 5 challenges, is this sense of inclusion. So we just saw from those profiles that we are not talking to the same boat owner that was coming into a dealership 25 years ago. They are different. The growth and emerging audiences that we're talking to are different to previous generations of the traditional boat owner. They're more likely to be diverse. We saw that 1 in 3 of them are Hispanic, 1 in 5 are African American, and they're twice as likely to be Asian Americans than the core traditional boat owners. They're more likely to be younger. I know these are quite small data points, but I'll hopefully call them out a little bit. But you can see that only 1/3 of the core buyers in that audience are between 35 and 44. But over half of the growth audience are in that age group. So we're really dealing with a younger profile audience, and they are also more likely to be educated, which is, again, reflecting perhaps also their younger base. And if we go into the next slide, please, one of these challenges is making sure that they feel that they are represented and included in the boating community. So what we've got here is what we're calling the representation gap. So there's a saying in marketing, which is that you have to see it to be it. If you don't see yourself behind that car or in that home or in that hotel room, it's very hard for you to imagine yourself there. And so we really need to make sure that these audiences feel that they are welcome in the dealership, they can see themselves behind at the steering helm of the boat, and in this environment. And when we looked at the data, you can see here the gap between the number of people in that audience of women, people of color, or Hispanics who want to own a boat, and then the number that feel represented in the communication they're seeing about boats. So one of the great things we can do is we can close that gap. And Ellen just showed you some material of all the campaign that we're doing to help people feel part of this community. And I know Kevin's going to share some additional work that's being done there. But again, closing that inclusion gap and representation gap is a real opportunity. And if we go into the next slide, the second challenge we saw in the data, which is not surprising, is economic uncertainty. And it was most pronounced among traditional core boaters who we know from the data are less affluent. They're more likely to be retired. They may be living on a retirement income or a pension. They're not currently earning an income, and therefore they're much more apprehensive about the economic climate. And 1 in 3 of everyone in our survey said that they postponed a major purchase in that last quarter of last year, whether that was a home improvement or a recreational vehicle or any large purchase. They postponed it due to the economic climate. And if we go on to the next slide, please, this is a challenge, obviously, because what you see here is consumer confidence levels in the blue and boat sales in the red. And you can see that obviously there's a correlation. Like all major purchases, boat ownership and boat purchasing is very much tied to how people are feeling economically and whether they feel that this is going to be financially sustainable and viable for them, and whether it's going to be a worthwhile investment. So on the next slide, one of the things as an opportunity that we saw in the data is that the growth and emerging segments are actually the least price sensitive and the ones in the most financially capable position to buy a boat immediately versus the core segment. And there are a number of factors, and we'll go on to talk about that. Interestingly, the core segment are most likely to be buying a boat with cash and outright versus growth and emerging segments who come from leasing culture. As Kevin knows from the automotive business, current generations tend to lease vehicles, especially affluent owners in these types of communities. So the core segments are the least likely to believe they can afford a boat today. There's only 1% of them, but yet 10 times that number are able to do that in the growth and emerging segments. And we can see that because their incomes are higher and they have a greater savings. The core segment are more likely to say they work paycheck to paycheck, whereas the growth and emerging segments say they make significant savings for big purchases over time. So already, even in the worst financial uncomfortable climate, they feel that they could buy a boat tomorrow. So that's an opportunity. And as we'll go on to talk about as well, another opportunity, particularly for the emerging segments who have a lot of the funds to buy the boats, but are not sure whether they want to take the plunge, pardon the pun, is helping them with what we've called the eROI. So they see, in the data shows that they see all their large purchases as investments. Now, that doesn't mean that they all have a financial return. In this case, with boating, they want to see an emotional and experiential return. They want to get these priceless experiences with their family and friends that they can't get in any other environment. And for them, that makes the purchase price worth it. And 1 in 3 of them currently are concerned they're not going to get enough of that, what we call that eROI, the experience ROI. Am I really going to use it enough? Will my kids want to be part of this? They can't be, again, because they haven't grown up around boat ownership, as we'll talk about, it's a little fuzzier for them knowing that emotional return on investment. Whereas the traditional boat owners who grew up, many of them, in a boating family, know the value, but these audiences are newer to this environment, and we have to reinforce to them this amazing, priceless kind of experiences that they're going to get on this boat that they're not going to get from another type of investment. And if we go on to the next slide for challenge number 3, and someone pointed that out earlier about closing gaps, this is another opportunity to close. So we did just a very cursory look at their behavior down the purchase funnel. And what's great is, again, we see a very intense interest in boating, and taking first steps, maybe asking friends about it, looking at videos, actively searching, Googling certain types of boating terms. But where we see the drop off is kind of, as we'd call it, jumping off the fence, actually going to a boat show or renting a vehicle, renting a boat, and taking action towards that goal. Because once they actually do, we see quite a strong conversion to shopping from 46 to 40% and 34 to 26%. So once we can get people actually taking that first step to being in a boat show, being behind this steering a boat, chartering a boat, they really then start to feel more actively involved in shopping for a boat. So we have this opportunity to close that that gap between actively searching and then taking it those serious steps towards buying the boat. And if we go on to the next slide, please. We can see actually, the opportunity here with boat shows and boat rentals. So, this is the gap that we really can close here. There's a real opportunity to make boat shows and boat rentals appealing and exciting for this audience. We find actually higher numbers for attending automotive shows, which is not surprising because it's more of a heritage of that. But again, we just need to get boating into their world and making sure that we're bringing these boating experiences through the shows, through rentals, through active outreach into their communities. So, and again, if we think about the emerging segments and growth segments, they're in less rural areas. They're in areas where they have to go out to boating. So again, we need to bring the boating to where they are and into their lives. And Kevin's going to talk a little bit about that in more detail. Great. So if you go on to one of the key challenges here that we wanted to go through again was education. So this was a really fascinating, not surprising, but still very interesting stat. When we looked at the core segment, 60% of them had been boating before the age of 12. They grew up on boats. They have memories. We talked about that EROI, that experience and emotional ROI. They have the childhood memories to draw on and go back to. With growth and emerging segments, we need to build those. They don't have that whole childhood to draw upon. And interestingly, when we did qualitative interviews among these different audiences, a lot of the core segments said, I want to give my children the experience that I had. When we look at the growth and emerging segments, they don't have that. They're going to be creating that potentially for the first time. When we also looked at the data on driving boats, you'll see that most of those core segments have been behind, they have actually steered and helmed a boat before, but growth and emerging segments have not. And again, try and think of owning a motorcycle without ever having been on the back of a motorcycle. So this is something that this is kind of the outreach we can overcome. So if we go into the next slide, please. And there are some ways that we can overcome this lack of understanding and experience of boating. And here's a great stat on an education piece that really prompted reconsideration among growth and emerging segments. So we know 40% of them need financing to buy a boat, but the majority of them don't know that 15-year financing was available. They were not aware of 15-year financing. When we told that 60% that 15-year financing existed, 1 in 3 of them said that made boating more attainable to them. So there are pieces of information alone. If we educate people, we can overcome some of the knowledge barriers that these audiences have because they didn't grow up in the world of boating. And that leads us to the last challenge, and that's the community. So I guess one of the secrets of the boating world for boat owners, and especially those core that grew up, as children in the boating world, is the community that comes with the boat. So they know, boat owners, 1 in 3 of them say that helps them meet new people. They know that boating it doesn't just connect you to places, it connects you to peoples and communities and clubs, and it helps them socialize. But you can see here in the stats, non-owners don't know this. And it is a highly valued part of boat ownership that we need to help people understand and feel part of. And another challenge within that community, as we see in this data point, that many of those audiences, that feel least traditional to the boating world, people of color, women, don't necessarily see themselves fitting into the boating community. And that goes back to the representation point. So if they're not seeing themselves, owning a boat, if you don't see a lot of women owning a boat, navigating, being in charge and leading in this world of boating, they're not going to really feel that they're sort of welcome in that community. So we have a real opportunity to build understanding and welcoming them into that community. And if we go on to the next slide, some of the insights that we can leverage. is understanding what they're looking for from that community. So we know what the core is looking for, a little more family friendly, maybe a little more chilled, relaxed, laid back. But we know from looking at the data that the newer next gen audiences are a little more active. They're looking for, nature, adventures, sporty activities, personal watercraft, being on the go, thrill seeking. For the emerging, it's the more high-end luxury types of experiences. So we need to make sure that when we're communicating the community itself, that they're not seeing older, more laid back, purely passive experiences, but they're seeing more of the lifestyle and experiences that they aspire to. And as Kevin's going to go on to talk about as well, seeing it like in a natural, authentic way is one of the reasons the Discover Boating team chose real people in the communication and leverages real people, because these are real stories. They're not like photoshopped things. They're very relatable. They're authentic to people's real lifestyles. And that's a really core and very strategic decision on the Discover Boating team's part in creating that. So I'm going to hand over a bit now to Kevin to talk about what that all means. And I know we have some Q&A coming at the end.
So implications, inclusion, as Alana just talked about, authentic representation. What does that mean, really? That means not just having a person of color or a female in the ad, in the communication, but someone that's in there authentically, culturally, such that when the end user sees that, they see themselves, they see that in a relevant way, and they connect to it. Economic uncertainty, the emotional ROI, financing, all of that. What you don't know, you don't know. What you hear, the myths that are out there, boating is expensive, it's all of these different things. Education is important. Outreach, bring boating to the next generation. Consumers today, and I talk about this all the time, particularly Gen Z and millennials, they were born with cell phones in their diapers. And in order to connect with them, you're going to have to connect with them in the ways that they connect with media. And so reaching them in the way that they desire to be communicated with is critical for us. I talked about education, demystifying the boat ownership. Again, you don't know what you don't know. If you don't see yourself, if you don't have the knowledge or the education of someone's kind of educated you around, okay, how do you purchase a boat? How do I, what's this about slips? What's this about storage? All of these different things. It's very important that we provide them that education so that they can know how they can go about this and enjoy this lifestyle. Community building. Community building is critical. Let's go back, Rebecca, I'm sorry. Community building, again, showcasing basically those that are in your community, those that desire something, and it doesn't necessarily mean someone that looks like you, meaning an African American. It's someone that has a like-minded, they're interested in like-minded activities, whether that's fishing, whether that's being in or under the water, activities that bring people who are interested in those things together. Next slide, please. So if you think about brands, right? Let's think about Uber. Uber added, Uber started off basically just driving us from point A to point B. And then they said, wait, okay, the pandemic happened. Oh, Uber Eats, now I can bring people their food. So now I can get my food, okay, in the morning, and then I can get that same Uber driver can take me to the airport. Then you think about Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime can give you everything that you want, from your clothing to household appliances and all kinds of other things. And now they can deliver your groceries to your home also. So evolving based on consumers' needs, wants, and desires is critical. And we're doing the same thing when we think about how do we evolve our ability to deliver manufacturer referrals. It's our boat finder. We built the boat finder, our dealer finder. So now a consumer in a market can put in a zip code and they can find a dealer near them. They can basically do research to find the brand that they're looking for. And consumers want to do this in one environment. They're looking for a one-stop shop. They're looking for an environment where resources are available to them so they can make informed decisions about how they want to go about it, the way that they would like to basically figure out their lives. And then some of the future enhancements that we need to make, because again, we're talking about this next generation, some who have not ever grown, they didn't grow up voting, they may start and come in a different door than the traditional voter. So boat rentals and charters are critical. That voting lifestyle, we know the younger generation that we're talking about, Gen X and millennials, they're joiners. They like to be part of groups. So how do we basically bring those groups together so that they can basically enjoy this lifestyle and they're not out in 5 years after they buy a boat? And then schools, training. It's critical that we provide guides when we talk about safety, all of these different things, because we have a lot of new boaters that are coming out on the water and they don't have the same background as the core generation that we talked about. Next slide, please. So how do we do all of this? Okay, so we talked, Alana talked about, we got to reach them, we got to connect with them, we got to make sure that they see someone that looks like them or someone that, they celebrate or understand. But the first thing that we need to do is ensure that our strategy is sound. And so our media strategy is really the previous slide, capture those hand raisers, ensure that we can deliver consumers to our manufacturers, to dealerships, such that they can then make informed decisions about their business and obviously keep our industry healthy. Build memory structure. The See You Out Here campaign, again, is designed exactly to do that. It's an invitation to see yourself out there. And there are people that you can see that look like you that are doing these things. And I love the fact that Alana mentioned that the people that are in our campaigns are real boaters. So when you see this African-American kid that, secured a bass fishing scholarship, to LSU, I can be that kid. That's important for us to be able to portray those kinds of stories and messages to that community. Be the content, genuine content, not fake individuals who have been paid to basically talk about Discover Boating, but people who genuinely enjoy the boating lifestyle and enjoy telling others about how exciting and wonderful it is. And then again, getting back to those audiences, we need to make sure that we are minding our knitting relative to our audiences, understanding how we reach, engage, and motivate all of them from our core to our emerging. And Alana talked about the psychographics of each one of those, so I don't have to go into that. Channels. There's not one channel anymore, all right? 20, 30 years ago, you had a newspaper, you had a television, and you had a radio. That doesn't exist anymore. And it's important that we use all of what's available to us in order to connect with these audiences, because not everyone uses technology the same way. Not everyone sits in front of the television at 8 o'clock at night to watch their favorite show on Thursday evening. You can now watch your favorite show on Sunday, even if the show comes on Thursday. And so the different channels really have to be a part of any media strategy. And then the partners that you select. That partner has to be the partners have to be a diverse group of partners, because not everyone's consuming the same media. And if you think about this next generation we're talking about, Gen Z and millennials, and even boomers, they're snacking media. They're all over the place. No one's sitting in one place getting their media. You get your news from one place in the morning, you go get your entertainment from somewhere else, you go get your sports and things from somewhere else. And so the mix and the diversity of media is critical. Also, when you think about some of the diverse segments, African-American, Hispanic, we have to make sure that we are connecting with them in such a way that we are introduced to those audiences through platforms that are creating content on our behalf that speaks to those audiences, and they introduce us to those audiences in a genuine and organic and respectful way. And so you see a variety of partners here, and it's important for us to do that in order to reach all of these different audiences, because these audiences are different. Next slide, please. Can you go back on? So I didn't do a proper Ed McMahon for this. One of our other platforms, obviously, where we connect with consumers are our boat shows. And this video here will give you a flavor for how Discover Boating this year, just the last 3 months, really focused on really bringing the brand to life and connecting with these different consumers, including our core. With that, I will turn it back over to Freya for Q&A.
Thanks, Kevin, Ellen, and Alana. That was awesome. A few questions have come in. I would encourage you all to continue to submit those through the chat feature, but I can run down the list of them. How does Discover Boating balance reaching the core segment of boaters with the growth and emerging segments as well?
Great question. I'm happy to hop in on that, and Kevin or Alana, please feel free to chime in. As Kevin alluded to, it's a massive balance. It's diversification, particularly when we talk about our audience, we talk about diversity, right? But it's diversity of media, it's diversity of content, and it's diversity of voice to make sure that we are connecting authentically with each of those audiences. We can't forget that core. And we know that first and foremost, a lot of them, as Alana talked about, are boaters today. The bulk of that audience are the boaters on the water today. And they're a key part of our See You Out Here campaign. They are essential to us inviting that next generation out to the water. So one of the things we do a lot of is how do we leverage those boaters to make sure that they're a part of that message and that they too continue to see themselves as part of the boating lifestyle. And it's a balance like anything else, but it's essential that we not ignore any of them. And one of the big takeaways for us as we dove into this research is really recognizing that we've been leaving a lot of customers on the table, if you will. That growth segment in particular and that emerging segment, we can't ignore them, because if we are going to grow into the future and have a strong customer base, and it's all about growth, right? Making sure that there's an opportunity for our industry into the future. How do we connect with them today? Alana talked about it takes 6 to 8 years, and we've got to start nurturing them now if they're ever going to be a part of the boating lifestyle that a lot of us enjoy today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellen. Another question that came in is, do you see more entrepreneurs in the growth segment?
Yeah, they would be most likely in the emerging segment, which is the third one out, just due to education and professional levels. But I think they're more likely to be in both the growth and emerging segments. They're more affluent, they're more educated, they're more likely to be in professional occupations than the traditional core segment. So you would really, if you were, that's not to say there aren't, this is, again, it's all about indices, it's likelihood. There are entrepreneurs in the core and traditional segments. In terms of likelihood, there are more, on average, more entrepreneurs in the growth and emerging on average than in the core. If that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Another question, I would assume that the growth and emerging segments would be more interested in electric boats compared to the core segment, and maybe more willing to get involved in boating if eco-friendly options were widely available. Were there any questions from those segments about electric boats?
Okay, that's a great question. The first thing to say is we did not directly ask them about electric boats. However, we did ask questions on sustainability and the environment. And both the growth and emerging segments are more interested in, in that area. I mean, what's great is everyone's a nature lover. And one thing that unifies all of them is a love for the water and waterways. So that's universal. But the growth and emerging segments are more likely to be concerned about climate change, climate crisis. They're also more likely to be kind of environmentally active, let's say, beyond just the boating world. So that is probably an area of engagement for them. I can go back to look and see if we have electric vehicle ownership. I'm not sure if that was within one of the questions we asked, but unfortunately we didn't ask them specifically about electric boats. But we do know that environmental causes and preserving and conserving nature is an interest area for all of them. So imagine they're nature lovers, they're out there. How much they do about it does depend on probably which segment they're in.
Great. I can answer one question. Yes, this is being recorded, and yes, we will be routing the recording in the next several days. Next question, within that segmentation study, was there a breakdown between freshwater and saltwater?
That is a great question. So this is pretty much nationally representative. So we heavied up on the 25 most boat owning states, but we didn't divide between freshwater boaters and those who live near freshwater versus those who don't. We just knew that they had to live near a boating water source, and we measured that out across the states. So unfortunately, we don't have that breakdown, but we do have boating types. If that can be any indicator, pontoon ownership versus others. So we can, dig that out and share that. But unfortunately, we didn't break down. We do have things down to the state level, but we don't have it by body of water.
Okay, thank you. How do you see the importance of sustainable boating experiences toward the emerging and growth segments? Do you see stronger interest in hybrid or electric boating?
So again, I don't want to overstate the research, so I can't say, if they've expressed an interest in hybrid or electric boating. What I can say is that conservation and nature, and particularly communing with nature, learning about nature, being part of nature, being part of the environment is a very strong motivator for a lot of the growth and emerging segments. And it's particularly, if you look for the urbanized emerging segments, that's one of the reasons they want to get a boat, so they can spend more time away from this urbanized environment. So, being in nature, enjoying nature, preserving nature, these are all things that they're interested in. Unfortunately, I can't extend that into those boating processions because we didn't ask those specific questions.
And Alana, I might jump in a little bit there because I think there might be a component, and you can keep me honest, around early adoption too, which we probably would see more in that emerging segment, being a little bit more willing to be that early adopters. And right now we know that there's from an accessibility standpoint, EV isn't there. But that consumer, the emerging and the growth segments in particularly, as Alana alluded to, they are concerned about, they care rather about sustainability. So what does that mean? It's not a one size fits all solution, right? I think EV could certainly be a path. How do we communicate as an industry the sustainable fuels that are available? How do we communicate as an industry how to take care of the water as a boater? How do we make sure that we're continually driving that reputation that we have done a nice job of being behind as an industry, that we are sustainable, that we do care about our environment? I think that really is the core of it, and what products come out of that In 10 years, it may be hydro, it may be, who knows, but what are those different ways that we can collectively lean into the sustainability message?
One thing I'll add to that is what we saw with that emerging segment on the automotive side is that group was responsible for Tesla overtaking BMW as the #1 luxury vehicle in the US last year.
Right.
Thanks, Kevin. Another question, what was the impact of having NMMA's boat shows branded as Discover Boating boat shows?
Great question. It was this boat show season that we just wrapped on the NMMA side earlier this month was a really great test for us. And one of the pleasantly surprising results was just the boost that we saw in organic traffic to discoverboating.com. We're seeing really strong organic, which is traffic that's not paid, that's coming directly to us as a result of, most likely, we're still testing and looking at the data, a result of a lot of the brand amplification, which was another critical benefit for us as an industry. And you see it on the PR side. I mean, whatever market you're in, and these are major markets, we got a lot of national media coverage. NMMA's boat shows have done a nice job of generating national media coverage, whether it's Miami, New York, Chicago, Atlanta. And as a result, we're seeing brand amplification, a brand lift in Discover Boating, and that's helping drive those people to our social channels. It's helping drive those people to our websites and be curious about what Discover Boating is and what we have to offer. And so that's been an opportunity for us to jump in and make sure that we're communicating across that boat show consumer group, helping educate them about the boat buying process, et cetera. And the PR that's come out of it has been a nice bonus.
Thanks, Ellen. How does Discover Boating support new boat owners after they've made a purchase with education regarding operation, safety, environment, boating laws, et cetera?
That's what I was explaining earlier in terms of Discover Boating being the destination for all things boating, for safety information, guidelines, resources. In fact, we just completed a safety video series that new boaters and existing boaters can use as a reminder about, when they go out on the water, in terms of, everything from captaining boats, life jackets, all kinds of topics are available as a resource on discoverboating.com. So that's our focus in terms of driving people to that destination so that they have the resources they need based on what they want to do out on the water.
Great, thank you. Regarding the research, did you ask where the emerging audience was accessing water? For example, from private marinas, yacht clubs versus public ramps?
We didn't ask for where the marinas and local areas, but I can tell you that we asked in terms of how they access their most recent experience and versus other audiences. Obviously, being on a friend's boat was the #1 most common scenario, but versus other audiences, emerging audiences are more likely to have rented a boat, chartered a boat, and used a boat at resorts. So one of the things, and again, just thinking broadly of their behavior, is it's part of their vacation repertoire and their social repertoire. And I think somebody asked this in the quote about rentals. That seems to be a huge opportunity. We asked them if they'd ever rented a boat. 1 in 3 vacation emerging audience boaters had rented a boat, and that went to 60% among the growth audience. So 60% of the growth target had rented a boat, 30% of emerging audience had rented a boat. So boat rentals, chartering, resorts, and friends were the key kind of current aspects for those aspiring boat owners. So they don't own a boat, but they've been on a boat. And where was that boat? It was they accessed the boat through those different environments.
Thanks, Lana. I think we have time for just about 2 more questions. What in the minds of the presenters was the biggest behavioral shift from pre to post pandemic?
Who wants to go for it, Alana?
I mean, I can jump in. I mean, the first thing to say is we aren't in a position to answer that as specifically as you've asked the question, because we didn't do a pre-wave, pre-pandemic. We've just done a post. But we can say from other data that we've looked at, things like communing with nature. So one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic is people rediscovered their local environments. You know, we talked about which bodies of water they went to. Well, during the pandemic for 2 years, people went to their local lake. They went to local environments. And so they rediscovered the nature around them. We saw people acquiring new types of recreational habits. And most of those have stuck. I mean, I know Peloton hasn't, but overall people got more active during the pandemic and they stayed more active. And the importance of connecting with family and friends. So again, the pandemic prompted a lot of people to reappraise their values in life and, you know, spending quality time with family, with friends, and in nature, which is great because that's all of the things that we're promoting with Discover Boating, increased during the pandemic. So those are just some themes that we got from other data sources.
Thanks, Alana. Okay, just one more question. And just to let you all know, these questions are amazing and we'll absolutely follow up afterward. But unfortunately can't get to them all. What do you all believe is the key thing that all of us across the industry should do to tap into this new potential boating audience?
I'm happy to take this one. So this is something we talk a lot about on the team is Discover Boating. I love this question because the Discover Boating team at NMMA and MREA can't do this on our own, right? It does take the industry really learning about and getting to know this next generation and thinking about how we truly connect with them in that authentic way that Kevin and Alana talked about. And the research that we offer, the imagery that we offer, the content that we offer across Discover Boating, any of the articles, posts that we share, that's all for the industry to leverage, use however you want to use it. And so we do see a lot of you tapping into that, which has been fantastic. And I think too, it's thinking differently about when you're at a boat show, how do you bring to life your exhibit in a way that's going to connect with people, knowing that they're really looking for that emotional ROI? How do you do that, obviously, in your marketing? How do you think about getting customers on the water through your dealership, through your marina, letting people try boating? And I think diving into the research to really look at how it might apply to your specific business and just sitting with that and thinking about it and building it into your business strategy is going to lift up not only your business, but the industry around you.
Beautifully said, Ellen. I think that's a great way for us to conclude today. Thank you all for being here, for taking the time today. And thank you for your wonderful questions. We will be following up. We also will be sending out a link with the presentation. And again, we'll address those questions as best we can. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.